5. Zail held up the ivory dagger, at the same time muttering something under his breath. The dagger flared bright, and for a moment, the unearthly horde seemed to back away. Then, as if galvanized by some unseen force, they surged forward, moving in determined silence toward the small party. "That should have worked," muttered the necromancer in an almost clinical tone. "They are ghosts, nothing more, I think." The horrific throng seemed to swell further with each second. They did not stretch forth grasping hands toward the fighters. They did not in any visible way show menace, but they kept coming. More and more of them. Their eyes never strayed from Kentrel's band, never gave any indication but that they sought to reach those before them. No one wanted to know what happened when they did. One of the mercenaries finally broke, turning and fleeing away from their group the way they had come. Captain Dumont swore, yet he could think of no other course of action. Waving his sword high over his head, he ordered the back weapons clutched tightly, although what use against fleshless horrors blades might be no one could say. The treasure hunters retreated into Ure in quick fashion. Even Zail and the Vigerai ran, quoth Sin, remarkably quick for one of his size and age. Behind them, seemingly barely moved, yet somehow more than keeping pace, the legion of pale figures followed. "At the next street, turn left," Kentrel called to the others. If memory served him, that way led to one of the watchtowers. If they could gain entrance to it, they could use it to climb over the wall. 2 of the men also alive carried rope. Certainly enough for them to reach the ground outside. But as they approached the intersection, movement from down the very path Kentrel had chosen made the mercenaries pause. More of Ure's forgotten inhabitants approached from there, their faces as hollow and wanting as those behind. "They're coming from ahead, too!" shouted Albort, pointing. True enough, more filled the street before them. Kentrel glanced right. Only in that direction did no ghastly horde yet confront the party. Only to the right did any hope of escape remain. Beside him, Zaio murmured, "What other choice do we have?" With a wave of his hand, Kentrel led the way. At every moment, he expected them to be cut off. But, despite his concerns, their path remained clear as they went along. Not so any of the side avenues. When 2 of the mercenaries broke away from the rest and tried to take one, spectral figures materialized from the shadows, barely inches from the startled men. The fearful pair quickly returned to the group. Curiously, although the new ghosts also gave pursuit, they, like those already behind, neared the fleeing party, but never actually came within reach. The necromancer said at first, "We are being led, Captain. We are going exactly where they want us." Kentrel knew what he meant. Even the slightest indication of variance in the party's route summoned forth scores of additional silent, horrific shades, but none that actually ever caught any of their prey. Not so long as the mercenaries continued on the path designated, the ghosts only kept pace. But what, the captain wondered, awaited the intruders at the end? Past tall stonework shops they fled, past narrow, elegant homes with domed roofs and walled entrances the band ran. In many, lamps and torches flickered, and now and then the voices could be heard. But the few times Kentrell managed to glance into one of the structures, he saw no sign of life. And throughout their perilous flight, the flute continued to play the same never-ending tune. The jovial laughter of the unseen man would now and then join in, seeming to mock the efforts of the harried company. Then the wary mercenaries found the path ahead cut off by more of the ghastly throng. At first, Kentrell did not understand why, but then he saw the narrow alley to the left, a dark, uninviting place that went on seemingly forever. The captain quickly surveyed the rest of their surroundings for some other recourse, but only the alley offered any chance. "That way!" he shouted, pointing with the sword and hoping that he had just not made a terrible mistake. No unblinking ghoulish forms materialized to block their way. One by one, the men slipped into the narrow passage. Kentrell kept the sword ahead of him at all times, aware of the foolishness of the act, but feeling some slight comfort despite that knowledge. "They're still behind us, Captain!" shouted the last in line. "Keep following me! There has to be an end to this! There has to be—" As if reacting to his very words, the alley abruptly gave way to a vast, open plaza. Kentrell paused just beyond the end of the alley, staring at what he could not recall of having not seen during the first few days of scavenging. "We couldn't have missed this," he whispered. "We couldn't have." "By the dragon!" gasped Zael, now behind him. When Kentrell glanced at the necromancer, he saw that Zael's mouth hung open in an outright awe, a sight in some manner nearly as startling as what lay before them. A massive hill, in actuality, a huge outcropping of Namir itself, rose up in every direction in the very midst of Ure. The hill itself, Captain Dumont did recall, of course, and even then he had wondered why the inhabitants would have chosen to build their kingdom to encompass a several 100-foot tall mound of pure black rock. Yet not only had they chosen to include it in their plans, but someone had successfully carved out an entire stairway leading up to the very top. And there, looming over all else, stood what so ensnared the eyes of all. A magnificent stone edifice with 3 spiral towers and a high wall of its own overlooked not only Ure, but the entire countryside far beyond. In shape, it reminded Kentrell more of the castles from back home. Tall, jagged, cold. Fierce, winged figures guarded the gate through which any had to pass, even to reach the outer grounds, where the black hill upon which stood melded perfectly into the shadow cast by the mountain. A faint aura seemed to surround the peculiar white marble from which the keep had evidently been built. Kentrell blinked twice, but the hint of light surrounding the regal structure remained. A bad feeling rumbled to life in his stomach. "The palace of Juris Khan," whispered Zael. "But it vanished with him." "Juris Khan's palace?" quoth Sin, barged through the stunned group, battering larger, more able fighters with only the staff. He stepped to the front and surveyed it as best as he could from his low position. More than a hint of avarice tinged his voice as he murmured, "Yes! Yes! What better place to look? What better place to look?" Kentrell suddenly recalled the pursuing phantoms He glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see them, even now, emerging from the alley, only to find his party seemingly abandoned by their terrifying companions. "They have ended the hunt," declared the necromancer, expression guarded. "They have led us to where we must go." Captain Dumont examined again the high, twisting stairway leading up to the huge, barred gate and the murky, winged forms atop the wall who seemed to stare down at the newcomers. "We go up there?" "At the moment," Zyle remarked, "it would seem better than returning to our friends. Do not doubt that if we turn back, they will come again, and this time they may do more than follow." "Of course we should go up!" Sin nearly spat. He jabbed the staff in the direction of the fabled palace. "In there!" Juris Khan's master spell work was completed by the combined efforts of his priests and wizards. "In there, the greatest of mage books will be found. And much gold, of course." Only the Vigerai seemed at all interested in the pursuit of power and treasure. Kentrel and his surviving men had lost their lust for riches, at least for the moment. Not one soldier there wanted to be far away from the shadowed kingdom, even if it meant leaving without the smallest coin. But no choice had been given to them. They had been led to the stairway, and the mercenary captain knew that it indeed not had been an accident. "We go up," he growled. "Keep those torches well lit." As they reluctantly began the climb, Kentrel noticed that something else had changed with the vanishing of their unearthly pursuers. No longer did he hear the unnerving music or even the laughter. Ure had fallen as silent as death. Up they slowly struggled, the stairway so steep, so awkward, that Kentrel wondered how anyone could have made the journey often. Here and there, parts of the step had given away, making the trek even more troublesome. The torches helped little to guide them, the flames seeming to be dulled somehow by the intense shade. Kentrel had seen pitch-black nights brighter than this day. Why, he wondered, had he not noticed how dark it had been on the previous excursions into the ruins? Why did it seem so different now? Up and up the band climbed. The stairway seemed twice as long as it should have been. After what felt like 1,000 steps, Kentrel noted the ragged breathing, his own included, and called for a brief rest. Even Sin, who desired to reach the palace, did not argue. Zail, looking far less worn than the rest, sat down a few paces above, hand once more on the bulging pouch, eyes closed. He sniffed the air, as if seeking something. The necromancer opened his eyes quickly when Kentrel approached him. Once more, the hand slipped away from the cloak, obscuring the pouch. "Captain Dumont." "A word with you, Zail?" "I am at your service." Squatting down near the spellcaster, Kentrel commented, "You evidently know a lot about this place. You know even more than old Sin, and he's been obsessed with this region all his life." "He has been obsessed with it all his life, but I have lived near it all of mine, Captain." "A point well taken, Zail. How much do you know?" "When you saw this," Captain Dumont indicated the palace, "you reacted with some surprise, but not nearly as much as me. This wasn't Here, necromancer, this hill, yes, but the palace of marble, it wasn't. And in a realm with ties to heaven itself, this surprises you? Kentrell snorted. For in unearthly heaven, Ure shown me only blood. Zael's left eyebrow arched. You have a very sharp innate sense, Captain Dumont, and an innate knowledge of the world. I suspect that would even surprise me. I ask you again, necromancer, what do you know about this palace? Only that it, as the Vajera indicated, the pale figure pronounced the one word with something akin to disgust. It was the place where the spell unfolded, where the path to heaven was opened. It does not surprise me to find that the home of Juris Khan would not follow mortal dictates, even now. It was touched by forces beyond our ken, and even a few centuries would not lessen their effect upon it. The words did Kentrell little good. He tried a different tact. I want to know what's in that pouch. As I said, a keepsake. And for what reason are you keeping it? It seems very precious to you. Zael stood, his face unemotional. In a louder voice, he asked, Is it not time we pushed on, Captain? We have a bit of a climb still. He's right, Dumont, muttered Sin from farther down. Time is wasting. Zael started up without another word. Kentrell gritted his teeth, then reluctantly nodded to the others to continue the climb. The time would come when the spellcaster told him the truth, the captain swore to himself. Provided they survived this madness, of course. Curiously, from that point on, the remainder of the trek went much swifter. The walled domain of the great, long-absent Juris Khan grew larger and larger with each passing step. Before very long, the high gates finally beckoned the climbers. Ugly beasts, Albert grunted, eyeing the two winged gargoyles. Up close, they had man-like bodies with leonine tendencies and beaked faces reminiscent of vultures. Their paws ended in curved talons like those of eagles or hawks. Wide, inhuman orbs glared down at any who stood directly before the barred entrance. This is the home of the most pious of the pious? Kentrell remarked. Gargoyles are often considered the guardians against hell, Zael explained. These obviously impress upon the visitor that only the good of heart will cross into the palace. Does that mean we have to wait out here, Captain? Someone called near the rear. We all go in, or none of us go in. Kentrell studied the barred gateway. If we get in at all. In answer, Zael reached forward to check. At the slightest touch of his hand, the massive door swung wide open. Shall we enter? He politely asked the mercenaries. The captain fought down a shiver. In opening, the ancient gate had been perfectly silent, as if it was freshly oiled. Zael took a step forward. Then, when nothing happened, he continued on to the palace grounds. Emboldened by the necromancer's success, Captain Dumont followed him, then signaled his men to come one by one. Albert crossed next, to be followed by Jodis and the rest. The more nothing happened to the first, though, made it easier for the mind following. The next came. One man even jested with the gargoyles, insisting that they reminded him of a former wife. For the first time since the city had awakened, the mood became somewhat relaxed. Sin stood back, watching each mercenary enter. When the last had passed through the gate, he tightened his grip on the staff and strode forward with all the arrogance of a conqueror. From above the entrance, the gargoyles suddenly howled to life. Wings outspread, the beaked creatures reared up. Stony orbs glared at the Vigeri. Talons stretched forth. Sin immediately retreated. The gargoyles instantly returned to their still positions. The gargoyles are wise-eyed, murmured Zael from behind Kentrel. Ignoring him, the captain stepped to the gate, looking over each gargoyle in turn. Had he not seen it for himself, he would have thought someone had made up the incident over a few mugs of strong ale. Reaching up with his sword, he tapped lightly on one figure, hearing only the sound of metal against solid rock. "Stand aside, Dumont," the Vigeri abruptly commanded. "I shall deal with these noisy dogs." Quoth Sin had the tip of his magical staff pointed at the gargoyle to his left. Even as he spoke, the other hand gestured over the wooden rod, causing some of the many runes inscribed in it to glow ominously. Zael joined Kentrel. "That might not be wise, Captain Dumont." The mercenary officer had to agree. "Don't do it, Sin. You'll only make matters worse." "This from a man who so demanded my magical aid earlier?" The Vigeri scoffed. "These beasts will not keep me out." Kentrel quickly jumped through the entranceway, blocking Sin. The Vigeri stepped back, but did not lower the staff. "Get next to me," ordered the captain. "Stay close, and we might be able to avoid any unnecessary trouble." "What do you intend?" "Just do as I said, Sin." As Kentrel started to move back to the gate, Zael confronted him. "If you insist upon this, you will need someone other than the Vigeri to watch the second gargoyle." He held the ivory dagger steady. "I will assist you." "I don't need any," the wrinkled spellcaster began. "Quiet, Sin." Sorcerer or not, Captain Dumont had finally had more than enough of his employer. Zael had been able to step where Sin could not, and that said much about both men. With the diminutive figure between them, Kentrel and the necromancer moved sideways toward the gate. The gargoyles stood fixed, simple statues of rock. No hint of their previous awakening could be seen. Placing one foot within the palace grounds, Kentrel exhaled slightly. His idea appeared to be working. With the sorcerer hidden between the two taller men, the magical guardians seemed to be caught unaware. Just a step or two more. As Sin's robed form began to cross the threshold, the gargoyle before Kentrel leapt to life, wings suddenly flapping, monstrous eyes glaring, and the stony mouth opened in a wild, ear-splitting roar. Behind him, Kentrel heard a second identical cry, proof enough that Zael also faced a newly revived beast. The beaked head came forward, snapping at an area just to the left side of the fighter. The captain's sword clanged hard against the marble maw, but the gargoyle at least withdrew. From the necromancer, Kentrel heard words of some unfamiliar tongue. Then a brief flash of light at the corner of his vision startled him. The first gargoyle used his surprise to attack again, and again tried to reach around the mercenary. "It wants Sin," Kentrel realized. It's trying to avoid fighting me. It wants only him. Fearsome talons swept by his shoulder, snatching at the smaller sorcerer. The Viserai batted at them with the staff, sparks flashing whenever the wooden rod touched stone. Sin! Kentril shouted. Now's your chance! Jump! At that moment, the flute music began again, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Kentril clapped his mouth shut, wondering what the return of the haunting melody portended. The music had a startling effect on the gargoyles. The one before the leader of the mercenaries paused in mid-attack, then peered up at the sky. It squawked once, then quickly repositioned itself as the party had first seen it. As Kentril watched, all semblance of life swiftly vanished, the guardian once more simply a sentinel of stone. Incredible, he heard Zael remark. Twisting, Kentril saw that the necromancer's monstrous foe had also returned to its original state. There could be no question that the music had given them this reprieve, and the captain intended to make good use of that sudden luck. Move it, Sin! The Viserai needed no more encouragement. Already he had one foot in the inner yard of the ancient palace, and by the time Kentril and Zael turned to follow, Quoth Sin stood waiting for them some distance inside. And still, the music played. It comes from inside, insisted the Viserai, now very eager to enter. Follow me! A chuckle escaped the vicinity of Zael. Brave man indeed, I say, to go where he's clearly not wanted. Kentril glanced at the necromancer, but Zael acted as if he had not spoken, and the captain had to admit that the voice had not sounded like his, nor had it sounded like any of his men under Kentril's command. No one else seemed to have noticed the voice, though Albert and the others awaited his orders. Sin already had a good start on the rest of the party, and for some reason, Kentril did not want the Viserai getting too far away. Something told him that he should keep an eye on the short, arrogant figure. The gargoyles had been placed at the entrance for a reason, and that they had reacted only to Sin, not Zael, as one might have expected, that did not bode well. Guided by the flute, the party reached the entrance, a high arched opening with two bronze doors upon which had been sculpted sword-wielding archangels. Curiously, the images looked badly battered, while everything else looked untouched. With the tip of his staff, Quothsin pushed at one of the doors. Like the gate, it swung open in silence. With all the confidence of one returning to his own home, the Viserai marched inside. Marble columns, 3 stories tall, flanked the magnificent hall, illuminated by a massive chandelier that the captain estimated held more than 100 lit candles. The floor consisted entirely of skillfully crafted mosaic patterns of fanciful animals, such as dragons and chimera. Something of a contrast to the archangels, Kentril thought. Between the 2 series of columns, portraits of imposing figures in robes of state no doubt gave homage to those who had ruled Ure over the centuries. At the end of the corridor, another set of doors awaited them, making their way past the staring visages of lords long dead. The party paused there, everyone quite aware that the music seemed now to be coming from within. Once again, archangels with swords adorned the entrance, And, once again, those figures had been battered hard. Sin reached for the doors, but this time they would not open for him. When Zael too tried, he met with no better success. Kentril stepped up next to the two spellcasters. Maybe there's a lock, or he'd have been about to touch one of the ruined images when suddenly both doors swung wide open. The trio backed away as a rush of cold air swept out from the darkened chamber before them. At first, they saw nothing, but then the music drew their gazes to the very back of the room, where they could faintly make out a dim lamp. And, seated next to it, in a high-backed chair, an elderly man in robes of white. He leaned forward, as if not noticing their coming. Kentril's eyes adjusted enough to see that a slim, hooded figure sat upon the floor before the elder. A figure with a flute held up to where the lips would have been. More ghosts, Albert muttered. Although he had spoken only in whispers, the two within reacted as if the chandelier had suddenly fallen within whole from the ceiling, loudly smashing to fragments on the marble floor. The hooded form ceased playing, then rose and slipped into the darkness with one graceful movement. The robed patriarch glanced up and, to everyone's surprise, greeted them, as if having waited all this time for their arrival. "You have come at last, my friends," he announced in a soft voice that yet seemed to carry the strength of an army in it. Never one to stand in ceremony, save where it concerned his own magnificence, the Vigerite tapped the staff once on the floor and declared, "I am Quoth-Sin, sorcerer of the innermost circle, brother of the high initiate, master of—" "I know who you are," the elder responded solemnly. He looked at Kentril and the others, and even though a vast distance stretched between them, the captain felt as if he stood immediately in front of the former, every thought and emotion revealed. "I know who all of you are, my friends." Zael pushed ahead of the sorcerer. He wore an intense expression that surprised most of those around him, especially Kentril. All had come to assume that the necromancer had such utter control of his emotions that nothing, not even the ghostly kingdom, could draw much reaction from him. Even the expression he wore when first seeing the looming palace could not match his present eagerness. "Am I right, honored sir? Am I right in thinking I know you as well?" "And do you?" The white robed figure found almost amusing. He leaned one arm of the chair, his chin resting on the palm of his hand. Are you not the great Juris Khan?" A frown escaped their host. "Yes!" "Yes, I am Juris Khan." "Saints above," whispered one mercenary. "Another ghost," snapped another. Kentril silenced the mercenary with a swift wave of his hand. He looked to Sin for confirmation, and although the sorcerer did not respond directly, the Vigeri's covetous expression said it all. Incredible as it seemed, they had found Juris Khan. He who had been the guiding light of a kingdom considered most holy of all, and a man who should have been as dead as the horrific phantoms that had herded him to this place. Herded them? "He did it," Kentril informed the others, advancing on the seated form. He had forced us here. He's the one who trapped us so that our only path could be to this palace. If he expected the Lord of Ure to deny the charges, Juris Khan much surprised him. Instead, the regal figure rose quietly from his seat, and, arms folded in the voluminous sleeves of his robes, bent his head in what appeared remorse. Yes, I am responsible. It is through my means you were forced to come to me. But that is because I could not come to you. What sort of nonsense? But the captain got no farther, for as he finished speaking, Khan reached down, seized his robe, and raised it just enough to reveal his feet. Or where they would have been. Just above the ankles, the Lord of Ure's feet melded perfectly into the front legs of the chair, so much so that one could not tell where the man ended and the wood began. Juris Khan lowered the robe and, in an almost sincere tone, said, I hope you will forgive me. Even Sin found this too extraordinary to ignore. But what does this mean? What about the path to heaven? Legends say... Legends say many things, Zael interrupted. And most of them are found false in the end. Ours being the most falsest of them all, murmured a voice from the darkness to the left. Juris Khan reached his hand forward to that darkness, smiling at the one within. They are what they seem. It is safe to come forth. And from the shadows, the flute player emerged. Hooded no more, for the first time, Kentrell saw that the flowing garment had hidden a woman. A young and very beautiful woman, with smooth skin like alabaster, eyes that gleamed like emeralds. Even in the faint light of the lamp and the men's torches, cascading red hair, even more vivid than that of the woman of his homeland, and an eastern cast to her features that spoke true of her birth in this faraway realm. My friends, my daughter Atana. Atana, a name that buried itself then and there in the veteran's heart. Atana, the most beautiful of beautiful women Captain Kentrell Dumont had ever beheld. Atana, an angel among mortals. Atana, the face from the brooch.